Well, welcome to our Tuesday evening weekly chat with two rabbis, Rabbi Zvi Kahn, Rabbi Barry Silver. We're thrilled to have you both here tonight to talk about Mishpatim, the Parsha, and take it away, gentlemen.
Hey, thank you very much, Sharon, for launching this meeting. I share some of my views, and then Rabbi Kahn straightens me out and helps me to see the light. And it's really great to have him with us and to have everybody else join in the conversation and share with us their questions, their comments, and their insights. We believe here that dialogue and conversation is the best way to try to arrive at the truth. And we do not believe that anybody has a monopoly on the truth. And so we like to engage in a spirited discussion and sometimes even a robust debate. And tonight we were going to speak about, of course, we always talk about the Torah passage. We're going to talk about death and dying, but because we're reading Mishpatim, and because this is the day that the Senate is taking up the impeachment, I figured we would have to mention something about that, because that Mishpatim is judgment, forming judgments. So certainly we'd want to talk about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Kahn and share with us your insights into the passage, Mishpatim, and the death and dying, if you'd like, and the impeachment, and anything else you'd like to share.
I'll just start with the Torah passage, and then we'll talk about other things later. So this week's, as Rabbi Silver mentioned, the Torah portion of the week is called Mishpatim. And I think right off the bat, what is very interesting to note is that the Torah actually deals with civil law. That's a piece of information that many people don't realize or are even aware of. When many people think about Judaism, they think of the rituals of Judaism. So they know that the Jewish tradition talks about the Sabbath and the holidays and all kinds of other prayer and other things like that. But they're not aware of the fact, in many cases, that Judaism and that the Torah itself has a lot of content, in this case, a whole Torah portion pretty much, that deals with civil law, things like damages and torts and what happens if you borrow objects from someone and you lose it and you don't return it, or things like negligence with property, or your property damages someone else's property, or you damage someone else's property. All of those kinds of cases are dealt with in this week's Torah passage of Mishpatim. And the Talmud has one of its six. The Talmud is divided into, the Talmud itself is about 60 volumes, a little more, 63 volumes, and it's divided into 6 categories. One of those categories is called nizikin, which means damages, and the root in the Torah for that entire section of books, of volumes of the Talmud, is this week's Torah portion of Mishpatim. So there's a tremendous amount of material if you combine both what's in the Torah and what's in the Talmud, a tremendous amount of content and material dealing with civil law, to the point that there, and this may also come as a surprise to people, there are Jewish courts that function till today. This goes all the way, the idea of a Jewish court, of course, a Beit Din, started all the way back in ancient Jewish history. But still today, there are Jewish courts that function all over the world. Their rulings are not binding, of course. However, if two people decide to go to a Jewish court because they have some kind of argument over finances, a debate about money or damages or property or something like that, and two people would like to go to a Jewish court, a Beit Din, to get a ruling, they can sign an arbitration agreement and they can go to the Beit Din. And then even under American jurisprudence, the ruling of the Beit Din, because the people sign an arbitration agreement, is binding upon them. Like if you went to any arbitrator in a business matter, and the Beit Din, the Jewish courts, use this Torah, our Torah portion of this week, and the voluminous amount of material in the Talmud to decide all kinds of questions, business-related, financial-related questions, like we said, damages, loans, all kinds of business investments, all kinds of cases like that. So it's really interesting to me just to kind of step back and realize that not just ritual law is dealt with in Judaism and in the Torah, but also civil law in all of its different permutations. So I'll open with that and go to Rabbi Silver, and then we can swing back around afterwards.
Thanks, Rabbi Khan. Always a pleasure listening to your exposition about the Torah passage. Before anyone goes to a Beit Din, if you're going to use this passage, Mishpatim, as your guide and have them rule according to Mishpatim, you might want to read the passage before you submit yourself to their authority, because there's some parts of it that you might find rather disconcerting, especially if you're a woman. And you don't want to go to the Beit Din if you're married, if you get married and you are not a virgin upon entering into marriage, because the Beit Din, if they're following the Torah, will stone you to death. Also, make sure if you go to the Beit Din, you haven't said anything untoward towards your parents or disrespectful, or again, you'll be stoned to death. If you have an ox and the ox has gored someone, if it's your first time, it's the first time it did it, you don't have to worry. You're kind of let off the hook. You get one free bite. But if your ox has gored in the past and now it kills somebody, not only is the ox stoned to death, which is kind of cruel, but you're stoned to death also, because now you had fair warning. And so you realize that your ox has dangerous tendencies. And so the Beit Din, if they're following Mishpatim, is going to execute you. I suppose it doesn't mention dogs, but I suppose the same would be true if you have a dog and your dog does that. So Mishpatim has some very, very enlightening, very, very uplifting, very ethical precepts in judgments. However, this was our first step towards morality, not our last. And fortunately, we've moved on since then. Unless you figure God wrote it, then you can't really do better than God. So you're kind of stuck with it. Unless you rely on the oral law or some other types of mental gymnastics to try to get out from under some of the more onerous aspects of this. I look at Mishpatim as people doing their best to try to live a moral life and come up with a moral code. Some of the precepts are very, very, very admirable. Like, for instance, it says, if you have an animal and you're going to sacrifice the animal or eat the animal has to stay with its mother for 7 days. Every animal is entitled to the right to be with its mother for 7 days. That's a very good thing. It would be better if they said it should be with its mother forever, and you shouldn't execute the animal or sacrifice it or kill it. And you should all be vegetarians so the animal wouldn't live 7 days with its mother and then the mother has to face the separation. That would be better. But my friends, this is a very good first step. It also says if you have a Hebrew slave, by the way, the Mishpatim totally condones slavery, has no problems with it. In fact, it provides lots of rules for it. If you have a Hebrew slave, after 6 years, you should let him go free. It would be nice if it said that about any slave, even if it wasn't a Hebrew slave, of any person. It would be even better if it said, you shouldn't have slaves, we don't approve of slavery. But letting the slave go free, that's a good first step towards recognizing that slaves should have certain rights. Then again, it says that if you're a Hebrew slave and you have a wife that you've acquired after you've become a slave and you have children, the wife and children become the property of your master. So he lets you free, but if you go free, your wife and kids stay behind. They're the property of the master. So now you're left in a really, really bad situation. Either you remain a slave forever, or you say goodbye to your wife and kids and they remain slaves forever and you never see them again. Now, if you decide that you want to see your wife and kids again and stay with them, it's not all fun and games either. You have to walk over to the door and your owner takes an awl, it's like a really sharp pointed instrument, and it bores it into your ear and drives a hole through your ear. That's proof that you now belong forever to the owner, and now you're his property forever, and then you get to stay with your wife and kids. My friends, if we believe that God wrote this, our ability to reason and to form ethical precepts are seriously compromised. In fact, if you believe God wrote it, that might be why there's many right-wing Jews who accept somebody like a Trump or somebody who's morally compromised. Because once you accept this, you can accept QAnon, you can accept anything. Once you accept this, anything goes. And it's very, very dangerous. And that's why right-wing Jews tend to have their moral sensibilities, in my opinion, seriously compromised. Now, we had a judge who said, you know what? I'm not going to work on the Sabbath. I'm defending Trump, which is a moral quandary in itself, but I'm not going to work on the Sabbath. And then he recanted and said, okay, I'll let somebody else do it, so you don't have to take the day off. I'd rather somebody who is Jewish say, you know what? Because I believe in moral precepts and ethics, I'm not going to represent the guy at all in his instigation of a coup d'etat and an insurrection in the Capitol. I'm not going to have anything to do with him. But this is a beginning. Mishpatim is the beginning of the Jewish people's march towards ethical morality. I do want to say one other thing, and this is somewhat off topic, but not really. I'm pretty harsh on the Republican Party and going along with a lot of things that I think are unsavory, but I heard Rashida Tlaib in tears in the halls of Congress saying, my life was threatened. It was a horrible thing that I experienced, and the life of my children was threatened. I wish one Democrat would say to her, now you have some idea of what the people of Israel experience every single day when they're surrounded by religious fanatics and maniacs, even more vicious than the people who stormed the Capitol, who are threatening the lives of Israelis every single day and threatening their lives of their children. And you Rashida Tlaib and AOC, instead of siding with the people of Israel, you side with Hamas. You side with the killers. You side with the terrorists. You, now that you know what it feels like, maybe you'll have a change of heart and side with people who actually celebrate freedom and justice and morality and stop backing a terrorist regime now that you've undergone this experience. I wish, I'm going to have to wait for the Messiah to come. I wish one Democrat or even a Republican would say that to these people and hold them morally accountable. Rabbi Kahn, I'll turn it over to you.
I feel like I've got to do some damage control.
I think so. The gauntlet has been launched. I think you have to do some damage control.
So just a couple of points. The Jewish Beit Din, the Jewish courts of today, and this has been true for about 2,000 years of Jewish courts since the destruction of the temple and after that period, the ending of the Sanhedrin, the great Jewish court that originally was in Jerusalem and then moved around a little bit about 2,000 years ago. But anyway, Jewish courts today don't do any executions. They don't do any lashings. They don't do any penalties. They don't do any of those things. And as Rabbi Silver did mention, it's really a combination. We talked about this many sessions ago. In Jewish jurisprudence, it's a combination of what's written in the Torah, the written law, and oral traditions, and that's why I mentioned the Talmud and things like that. So you can't really accurately look at any particular verse and say, oh, this is what a Jewish court would rule or a Jewish court would do, without looking at the way things are interpreted and explained and things like that. So a lot of the verses that appear, strikingly primitive or harsh or cruel, there's a lot more to the story and a lot more to that. But of course, as I said, nobody has to go to a Jewish court. Even in Israel, you don't have to go to a Jewish court of Beit Din, except in certain areas of life. But in general, certainly in financial law and in things like that, it would only be if people wanted to do that and commit themselves to accept the ruling of the Beit Din. But Mishpatim is certainly a complicated Torah passage, and there are laws that, with modern sensibilities, we could read those laws and say, wow, this is truly shocking and you know, have real problems with the things that are written there. And there are other things that we would read and say, you know, this seems to fit with modern sensibilities or to move in the direction of modern sensibilities and things like that. One thing I will say about Jewish slavery, and it really I feel was more of a kind of indentured servitude, but the idea was that if a Jewish person stole from another person and couldn't pay the money back, they didn't have the money to pay that person back, then the law was able to, the authorities were able to take that person and say, you are required to work for this other person and be his servant, not like just work and go home at night. You're going to have to serve this other person that you stole money from until the debt is paid back. It wasn't a case of a person being enslaved because someone captured them or something, or took them in a war or something like that. That existed. That type of slavery existed. But the rabbi mentioned Jewish slaves, and that was a different kind of situation. And some people found that by using that kind of system, a person could pay back their debts, could pay back things that they stole, could pay back loans that they weren't able to pay back through working or things like that.
Or selling your daughter into slavery if you couldn't pay back the loan, right?
No, I'm not familiar with selling your daughter into slavery.
Well, the Torah talks about if you sell your daughter into slavery, and then it has certain things. If the daughter, it's in Mishpatim. If you sell your daughter into slavery and she's displeasing to her master, he can let her free, unless his son wants her. Then he owns her. But that's in Mishpatim. You can sell your daughter into slavery to make ends meet. You know, if you're having difficulty, if times are hard, just sell her into slavery. But why would a divine, all-intelligent being write such things? Why would that be? Doesn't it make more sense to think that people wrote this than that the supreme intelligence of the universe wrote such things? And also, why put it in writing? Because what if somebody didn't come along 2,000 years later and discover the oral law, and they were just going by what's written in the Torah? Why would the supreme intelligence even take a chance that somebody would see this and not know about the oral law, which came along much later? Why do that?
You're asking why should there be a system with a written corpus of law and an oral tradition? Why would that?
Well, I take it the Orthodox claim that God wrote all these things. Why would God write things like this? Why would God have anything to do with such barbarism? I mean, you say it's primitive, but if you accept that people wrote it, then it makes sense. Okay, people were primitive, they wrote it. But was God primitive? Did God change as over the years? Did he get a little more humane in his old age? Or why would God write this stuff?
Look, I think that from the point of view of a human being at any point in history, they could look back and say, based on the sensibilities of my time right now, I question A or B or C or D or whatever it is. The values and the teachings of the Torah, if they're viewed in a timeless sense, when they're combined with the traditions of the oral law, then I think I don't view them the same way that you're describing them. Again, you're taking the text itself and you're saying, this is it, this is all we have, and this appears either primitive or barbaric or cruel and not fitting, so to speak, for a divine intelligence to say it. But to look at verses like that in a vacuum, I don't think is appropriate. I don't think is accurate. That's not the way the system was intended to exist.
When was the oral law? When did that become known to everybody? I mean, Moses told it to Joshua, right?
That the idea was that it came from God to Moses and then was passed on to the people so that the people from the beginning had two bodies of law, so to speak, or two bodies of tradition, one written and one passed down and explained. And those two things have always been hand in hand, have worked hand in hand.
But there's no evidence in the Torah that there even was an oral law. And the oral law wasn't written down until 2,000 years later in the time of the Talmud. And there's no reason to think that someone who's reading the Torah would have access to the oral law. I mean, if you're reading the Torah, I just can't conceive. I have trouble believing that you could conceive that. I don't care what the context is, what the oral law says, I don't care. how would a supreme being write such barbaric things in the Torah and then hope that maybe someone might discover 2,000 years later some softening of it? And why would he write death penalties over and over and then never have it enforced? That sounds kind of like a bizarre way of writing the law. I know God's supposed to be smarter than us, but it sounds like, in my opinion, it sounds like he's pretty cruel, barbaric, and pretty dumb to put this stuff in writing and then hope that somebody's going to figure out the oral law 2,000 years later.
So let me go back to the first thing you said, which I think is very important. You said that there's no evidence in the Torah itself for the existence of an oral law. And I actually think that that's not correct, that's not true. And I'll give you some examples. There are many, many cases where the Torah refers to certain commandments without giving anywhere near sufficient detail for a person to actually be able to implement it and to put it into practice and to observe it. All of the things nowadays that we think of when we think of Jewish practice, Jewish observances, Jewish rituals, if you look in the Torah, you get only a very basic little bit of information about doing it. Whereas, so the idea that those laws could have been given the way they're written and people could have been expected to observe them is almost, that to me is almost inconceivable, because the details that you would need to actually implement them and put them to action aren't there. So the idea that there's explanation and more information that needs to come along with this document of the Torah, to me, is very, very clear. In addition,
well, Rabbi Kahn, let me just stop you there for a minute.
Okay.
Let's just say that you're correct. All right, that there's information missing. It lays out a law and there's information missing. There's a scientific principle that helps us explain things. It's called Occam's razor. It says if you have two explanations, choose the one that's simplest. So here's two explanations. Explanation number one, there's parts missing from the Torah. We don't have the entire body of Jewish law because nobody wrote down all of it. And there's certain parts of Jewish law that are missing. That's logical. That's one explanation of why we don't have it explained. Another explanation is, well, God didn't write down all of it because he wanted to leave certain blanks so that he could tell Moses and rely on Moses telling Joshua, and then rely on Joshua telling somebody else. And then they're going to play telephone tag for 2,000 years and have different Talmuds. And he would hope that somebody would figure out somewhere that when he said to stone a woman if she's not a virgin, that somebody would figure out that he didn't really mean it, and there was some way of softening, which to you seems like the more likely explanation, that there's just certain things that we don't have and they're missing, or that God would say to stone people and then leave it to oral law to fill in the blanks. And also that's a long stretch to say, well, there must be an oral law, because why else would there not be an explanation? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why there's things that could be missing from the Torah besides that, right?
The piece that I think you're missing in the analysis you just gave is that if this divine being wanted there to exist a partnership with human beings, as opposed to just, here it is, do everything that's here, then it makes sense to have a system of saying there's a critical, vital role for people to play, human beings to play in this process. In other words, God says, I'm giving you the core document, and I'm giving an oral explanation. And by people studying that, transmitting it, teaching it to their children and their students, and passing it on from generation to generation, you have a partnership between God and human beings to carry on and maintain the system.
Well, why doesn't he say that? Why when he says you should stone a virgin, why doesn't he put an asterisk and say, see oral law for an explanation? Or why when he says you stone someone if they're picking up sticks on the Sabbath, or you commit genocide, why not put an asterisk, see the oral law to explain? Because it sounds pretty bad, but there's an explanation for it. Why just state it starkly like that and then hope that somebody might figure out the oral law thousands of years later?
If the oral law, and I understand, obviously, it's easy to contest this and say, well, no, I don't accept that this is true, but let's play it out. If the oral law was given at the time that the Torah was given, then there's no question of, oh, I hope 2,000 years from now, people devise, develop an oral law, or discover an oral law. If the oral law came along with the Torah, as is the traditional belief, or as is the Orthodox belief, if you want to put it that way, then from the beginning, God set up this system and relied on people to play the role of passing on this, of studying and passing on this oral tradition along with the written law, so that the two things could go hand in hand and work together. I want to say one other thing, and then I think maybe we should switch over to lots of the other because I don't want to take all the time on this. But there are many, many verses in the Torah that I believe indicate the existence of an oral law, where you read the verse and it seems like there's more that's being hinted to. There's more that's being talked about here than just what's in the document itself, and not just, oh, something must be, we're missing a book, or we're missing 10 books, or we're missing 50 books of the Torah. It's more a case of a kind of clear situation where there must have been more information than what's given to it.
Because the Torah makes no sense. Because there's something that's a complete...
That obviously I don't believe.
Well, what you're saying. I've heard the Orthodox explanation. There's got to be more to it, because what I'm reading here makes absolutely no sense, or it's contradictory. So there must be something more to it that's in the oral law, because otherwise this wouldn't be nonsensical, right? That's pretty much the Orthodox explanation to it. There's got to be an oral law, because this doesn't make any sense, or this is contradictory. Or missing in detail, missing in amplification, and those kinds of things. I would suggest it makes more sense to think that maybe there's just contradictions in the Torah, or maybe two rabbis had different views, rather than, well, there's a contradiction, so there must be something else out there that proves the oral law. To me, it just proves contradictions.
Let me say, you mentioned Occam's razor several times, and I just wanted to say one thing about that. I think if you ask any criminologist, and there are many examples in life where this would be true, but let's take a criminologist. If you asked any person or a police detective, and you said to that person, when you examine a crime scene, do you use the principle of Occam's razor that the simplest explanation must be true? And a criminologist or a police detective or investigator will say to you, absolutely not. In my career, I've seen many times where the simplest explanation, the guy whose fingerprints were on the knife, actually turned out not to be the murderer. He was a guy who came and picked up the knife and said, oh my God, what happened here? While the real murderer who used the knife had dropped it and run away. So the fact that there's this idea of simplifying things doesn't mean, and I think we can all realize this as a fundamental truth of life, the way it actually works out. The simplest explanation is not always the accurate explanation. Sometimes things are complicated. Sometimes things are messy. Sometimes things are totally different than the way you might look at it and think it appears. So the idea of using the simplest explanation will definitely get you to the wrong conclusion in lots of situations in life. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Rabbi Kahn, you're a very great debating partner. I appreciate your comment. And I do agree with you. There are many times when the simple explanation is wrong. But what Occam's razor is saying is that all else being equal, like to take your example, let's say you have a video and the video is showing somebody going through the door, taking a gun and shooting someone, and the guy's fingerprints are on the gun, and the guy the day before said, I'm going to kill you. And then you say, okay, I think it was some other guy who has nothing to do and there's no evidence. Occam's razor would say, go with the one that seems simple. But you're right. There are times when the simple explanation is wrong. Occam's razor is just saying, all else being equal, go with the one that's the easiest to explain. Because the other one would have to be, okay, the guy's fingerprints got there by some convoluted way. Somebody doctored the video. He said it the day before, but he didn't mean it. I mean, it requires a lot of explanation but I agree with you. I do agree with you, Rabbi Kahn. let's leave it at that agreement. The simple explanation very often is not the correct one. Did you want to say anything about what's going on today with the impeachment, with what's happening today?
I'll just make a simple comment. I kind of go back and forth in my mind between, isn't this maybe a waste of time and energy based on the fact that he's out of office and we have so many pressing matters to deal with? That's kind of what half of my head tells me. The other half of my head tells me that what happened was so egregious and so extreme that for even if it's just for history, you have to show that the effort was made to hold Trump accountable for what happened here in this incident, because we're talking about thank God, thankfully, a truly historic incident where a president says things that at least appear at face value to have inspired this riot. And so I go back and forth in my mind, and I like the fact that the Senate people have already agreed, the senators have already agreed that it'll be a short process. They're not going to let this go on for weeks. They're gonna do what has to be done, take their vote, and then move on, because obviously we have so many other priorities that have to be dealt with politically.
Rabbi Kahn, you are a true rabbinic scholar. You say, on one hand, we should do this. On the other hand, we should do that. I can see both sides. My compliments to you. Okay, anybody want to jump in? We've said quite a few things. I'm sure somebody has some reaction to something.
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Currently, the trial will go on, I agree to that, but the result is already predicted. It takes 67 votes out of 100 to find him guilty. At the present time, there are only 56 votes, and he will not be found guilty. That's me.
What do you think about that? Do you think that's a good thing, bad thing? What do you think?
I think it's, well, sometimes good or bad, is in the eye of the beholder. Matter of fact, I really appreciate your tie. I really like that. I remember you and I had ties that were similar to one another. I want one of those. But, that's my way of getting out of answering that.
Well done. Well done.
That's pretty good.
You just kind of snuck that through.
He's good at changing subjects, yes.
Good. Yeah. It's just mind-boggling to me that people who swear an oath to uphold the Constitution and to give a fair trial in the last impeachment didn't even hear the evidence and just said they agree with whatever Trump does, that's fine. That's not a fair trial. They're violating their oath of office and their oath to uphold the Constitution and democracy. It's just mind-boggling to me that people who were almost murdered and they still just go lockstep. And it was explained by the president. He said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and my followers would support me. How shameful that anyone would prove him true. He's responsible for 5 deaths, multiple injuries, the insurrection, and a takeover of our government, and people don't even form a judgment. It's just so un-Jewish. It's such a violation of what we consider Mishpatim, judgments. At least hear the evidence and don't say that this person is above the law. We Jewish people don't believe in divine right of kings. We don't accept that. We hold everybody accountable. And it's, what's amazing to me is some black guy came along and murdered somebody, with Trump and all of his cronies, all of his buddies say, hey, you know what, let's just move on. Don't live in the past. Let bygones be bygones. Come on, let's all unite and get together. This is outrageous. And for a system of government to allow this to go on and to allow people to say, let's just move on and forget about it, it is just such a horrible thing to do to our legal system, to our Constitution, to our sense of democracy. It's just outrageous. And I can only quote Netanyahu, what he said about Palestinian terrorism, and the world did nothing. He said, the lack of outrage is the outrage. Domestic terrorism, and we're told to move on. And the guy who encouraged it, we're told, well, let's not dwell in the past. To me, it's an outrage, a moral outrage.
Okay, I can agree with that. One of the biggest problems in this whole process was that in the House of Representatives, it was Nancy Pelosi who pushed doing this without going through the regular procedure. Now, I will also say this. One of the biggest problems that Trump has ever had is himself and the things he says. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, the result is going to be he will not be impeached. Right or wrong,
Yeah.
That's going to be the reality.
Well, what he says is pretty bad, but what he does is also rather incriminating.
Could be.
Anybody else? Go ahead. Mishka, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Did you want to add something to that?
Well, I was going to bring up something else, but are we done with that particular subject?
Oh, bring up anything you want. It's all yours.
Sure.
I still like your tie, by the way. I think that what's going to eventually happen is that Biden is not going to complete his 4 years. Under the 25th Amendment, and you had a little thing on your wall, under the 25th Amendment, he can resign, and then the vice president will be Kamala Harris. And for the first time in our history, we're not only going to have a woman president, but a woman president of color. I think that's what's going to happen.
Why do you think that? You think Biden's too old or he's frail, or why do you think that would happen?
No, I think that's the plan of the Democrats.
Oh,
Yeah. And for a political scientist, okay, in my field,
yeah.
I would love to see that.
Well, I would too. We'd have the first Jewish second husband.
Correct.
First
I
Jewish
was just
first
going to say
husband.
that. And the kids are all raised in the Jewish faith, and she converted, I think, didn't
No,
she?
she didn't convert,
You know,
but
she did.
No, but there would be a lot of Jewish grandkids running around, and there's a lot of diversity. And I like this administration. I like having a Native American as Secretary of Interior. There's a lot of African Americans. Yeah, I think it's great. Anybody else? Who else wants to jump in?
Emily, go ahead. Unmute. Unmute
I
first.
saw in the news today that Netanyahu left in the middle of his, did anybody see that? That he was on trial for corruption, taking bribes, et cetera, and he didn't like the way the trial was going, and he walked out. Anybody have a comment on that? I know that Harris is into Israeli news. This happened to be just a little blip on in the newspaper.
Yeah,
No
I didn't hear
comment.
about it, but if that's what happened, it's just a horrible example that he's setting of putting somebody above the law, and that should not happen in Israel. That's for darn sure. I like Netanyahu. I think he's very outspoken. There's certain policies he does I don't like, but he's a strong defender of Israel. And,
But he's a crook. He's a crook.
hey,
No,
Emily,
he's
don't be
not. No, that hasn't been proved. That hasn't been proven yet. You can call him a crook,
That's true.
but there
That's
is no
true.
proof to the extent that he was found guilty.
Thank you,
okay?
Mishka. I agree with you.
Thank you,
There's no
Mishka.
proof. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Harris. Harris is our expert on Israel.
No, I want to just say one thing about executions. Israel did have one execution. I believe it was Eichmann.
Yeah.
That was the only execution they ever had.
Yeah, what's incredible about Israel is that with all the terrorists who have murdered so many innocent civilians, they don't execute people. Israel has one of the most humane systems of justice on the planet. No other country would go through what they've gone through with people murdering school children and people in restaurants and on buses and not kill them. And these people are then used by terrorists as bargaining chips. It's just unfathomable that Israel would be so merciful. It's a very far cry from Mishpatim. And it shows you how the Jewish people have evolved and emerged from very primitive beginnings to an exceptionally moral system of justice.
Yes.
Who else?
I agree.
Paul, go ahead.
There. Good evening. First, I guess, looking at what's happening today, it's fairly easy to assume that the verdict is a foregone conclusion. But we have to remember he is impeached, and he will always go down in history as being impeached, not once, but twice. And when we look back at throughout history, you know, the three the three people that preceded him, that's what we look at. We and some young kid is going to be reading the history books and going to see that he was impeached twice, and then look at, why did this happen? So anyways, but I also want to add that I think what has happened with respect to Trump is as much reflection on us and our times as it is upon anything. Recently, I was rereading Shelby Steele, and he was comparing the administrations of Dwight Eisenhower with Bill Clinton, and saying if Dwight Eisenhower was well known that he had spoken, made racist comments in the past, but it was ignored. However, if he had been unfaithful to his wife, it would have been the death knell of his administration. But of course, Bill Clinton could be unfaithful, but yet if he had said anything that was construed as racist, his administration would have been over in a flash. And now we have this duality where we have a guy can do anything and he's accepted on one side, but on the other, both things would be the death knell of a Biden administration.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a whole different standard. And I think because he's wealthy and he's white, and he has people in a cult-like stupor where the sense of morality is gone. And if you look at history, you'll see that the Whig Party had difficulty trying to grapple with the moral complexities of slavery. And because they were morally compromised, the party fell apart and disappeared. Same thing with a party called the Know Nothing Party. I think right now the Republican Party is going through some inner turmoil. They have to decide, are they going to take a stand against insurrection? Are they going to take a stand against lying? Are they going to take a stand against someone who is a climate denier, someone who has encouraged people to take over the government, someone who, when in Michigan, when they tried to kidnap the governor, did nothing and said, I'm with the Proud Boys. Are the Republican Party going to put up with that? And I would say if the Republican Party is going to accept that, then the party is over.
Right. I have one other
Let me bring up one thing. Eisenhower had a lifelong mistress.
Sure.
His chauffeur.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you said, he didn't.
No, but it
he
wasn't
did.
brought out in public.
Wasn't known.
Yes.
That's because of the press.
no.
That's because of the press.
It was known. It was known.
I meant wasn't known to the public, I don't think.
Public.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't known to the public.
Well, the press weren't animals like they are now. I mean, you've got a situation where, you can't go to the bathroom without the world knowing about it. Come on.
That's true.
It's a big difference. I mean, if we had the kind of voracious press back then that we have now, I think our entire country would be in a different position, because some of these politicians were pretty damn scary, and what they got away with, from the president on down. And I think it's a very different society that we're living in. And my fear at this point is that you're going to have very, very qualified, very sincere, very caring people who are very knowledgeable in world events, that because of that situation will not run, because they do not want their lives disrupted like that. There is no line between public and private. And in some instances, you might say that's good. In other instances, you're going to lose a whole lot of very, very qualified people that will not step up to the plate. And I think we're going to be feeling that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Go ahead, Emily.
A couple of things. First of all, I think we have to separate our puritanical values that this country espouses. Remember, Mitterrand's mistress got a pension. I mean, who one sleeps with should not affect how one governs. On Morning Joe this morning, there was a guy that was talking about comparison between the Whigs at that time after the Civil War or before the Civil War, and the Republicans now, and that the Whigs had to deal with whether or not to expand slavery. Slavery was accepted at the time, but the issue was whether or not to expand it. Now, the Republicans now have to deal with whether or not they want to accept the fact of a multiracial society and a global society. And the comparison is really very true. I think, and also we have to separate good, humane conduct from sexual morality. Doesn't make any difference. I don't care who somebody sleeps with if they're an honest governing person.
That's the problem that we're confronted with now.
I agree with you,
We're
Emily.
confronted with now.
My policy is let sleeping dogs lie.
Oh,
But if they're gonna lie about who they're sleeping with, then that's a problem.
When I was in the Air Force, I was a driver of the Mistress of one of the generals in the Air Force.
Sounds like a pretty good job to me.
Yeah.
I'm finding out a lot now, boy. Wait till this meeting is over.
Mishka, did you get any fringe benefits from that job or no?
Don't say anything, it'll incriminate you.
Yeah, you might not
You'll
be
need
able
a
to run
lawyer.
you won't be able to run for
Actually-
president.
I actually did, because I was very, very young at one time. It's a long way back. And it was a nice assignment because I got to drive a nice big heavy car. I had a guard, and I didn't have to wash dishes or all that kind of things if I did something wrong. I mean, in those days, a great assignment.
So you didn't mind
Thinking
the
about
Mistress. All right.
Okay,
Who
I'm gonna
else
keep
wants
my
to-
past
who-
a secret.
Who else wants to share some thoughts? Go ahead, Sharon.
Nothing about what anybody's talking about now, but
No
something that
mistresses?
Harris would typically have talked about. I got an email that Israel has come up with a new substance called XO-CD24, which was developed in Tel Aviv, and it's completed its first phase of clinical trials on Friday. And they treated 30 patients with coronavirus in the hospital whose conditions range from moderate to severe, and 29 of those 30 went home the next day. So it's
Wow.
it's a cure for the bad part of COVID. And one of them, one patient took slightly longer to recover. From inception to now was only 6 months in the development of this drug in Israel. I think they've just got some amazing scientists there. It's just amazing. So this
Yeah.
could actually be what solves the COVID the COVID issue once you've gotten it and you're in the hospital. So I mean, it's just amazing.
That is amazing. And I think we're so lucky to have Israel. Israel has the highest concentration of brilliant scientists in the world, and they're coming up with stuff all the time. It's just amazing what they're coming up with. So we're very, very lucky to have Israel and to have all these brilliant scientists working on our side. Who else wants to share some thoughts with us?
Bet
Leah,
Leah-
do you
I
have
bet
any, do you
Leah
have any
does.
comments you want to tell us about anything we've discussed
You're on mute.
or anything else?
She's thinking about it.
Really scared her.
I mean, I do have one thought. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's just food for thought. And I'm thinking, is it possible, well, back to the law, whether it was written by God or not, I'm just thinking, is it possible that God expected the people to evolve? And so I'm thinking of when Jesus was asked by the people, because you guys do acknowledge Jesus. So when he was asked by the people about marriage, because we do know that back then you could marry a lot of women, and you can basically get rid of your wife, or they had a lot of rules for that too. So he was asked about that, and he said, you know, at the time, Moses told them he had one prescription, for the situation. So that was the prescription based on that time. And he even explains it's because of the hardness of those people's heart. And so that was the prescription given. But then he goes and he says, you know, in the beginning, that's not how it was. And we know that the whole thing about Jesus coming is to reestablish order as it was in the beginning in the garden before people had all of their issues. So is it possible that for that time that God gave a prescription based on the population he was dealing with, based on those people? And I do believe that it was his expectation that they would grow from just whatever applied to that time and with that time period to get the essence of where he was going. Because he eventually talks about, you know, that it was written that an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you know, vengeance, revenge. But then he goes, I give you another law. You know, for me, I'm prescribing love. I'm prescribing something else. So it's almost as if there's a graduation. Yes, at the time, that's what was given, but it was in regards to that time. That's like me as a parent. Maybe at some point I have my kids they relieve themselves in diapers, but eventually I might do a potty. But eventually my expectation is constant graduation, and God is a father. So I don't know if that makes any sense where I'm going with that, but I could see something to that extent. And
Leah, not only does it make sense, your view parallels the most brilliant, according to some, Orthodox rabbinical authority in all of history. And Rabbi Kahn, I don't know if you would agree with that, but Maimonides is certainly up there. It's like the smartest guy who ever lived. And his view is exactly what you're saying. What he was saying is, this stuff sounds kind of harsh and kind of cruel, but that's all they could accept at the time. They were like little kids, and you can't make them into college graduates overnight. So God gave them primitive things that they could relate to and understand. They were used to a harsh society, and so it was all they could take. And then gradually, he introduced them to more and more enlightened concepts. So that is a very interesting concept that Maimonides proposed. It seems to work pretty well, but there's some problems with it, in that the Torah also has genocide, in which God is ordering genocide. It's hard to imagine that at any time it would be okay to wipe out men, women, and children because they're worshiping the wrong God, or that you execute someone because they're not following the right rules. It seems like that's not a great explanation for why God would do it. But Maimonides went with that explanation. To me, the easier one by Occam's razor is just to say God didn't write it. But what you're proposing has been proposed by leading Orthodox authorities. Also, you might be interested in knowing, as far as Jews and Jesus, which is a whole nother discussion, Jewish people have different views on Jesus. Some believe that he was a great prophet. Some believe that he was a false prophet and taught things that are very dangerous and have been used against Jews. Some believe he never lived. So Jewish people don't take a position on Jesus at all. There's a whole wide range of things about Jesus. But you could also say that, as far as I'm concerned, in some ways, his teachings were very mellow, like you say, but in other ways, they were pretty harsh. He did say, I have come not to change a jot or a tittle of the old law. So anything he says that deviates from Jewish scripture could be seen as not authentic or something that we shouldn't follow. Also, in Christian scripture, it's pretty clear that if you don't accept Jesus, you will burn in hell forever. That's kind of harsh. And I don't know many parents. Imagine, and everybody here who has kids, imagine if your kid crossed you or did something wrong. Could you bring it upon yourself to make them face eternal torment forever? I don't think any parent could ever do that. And I don't think we should postulate a God who's much more vicious than we are. If you think about it rationally just for a second, let's say you told your kid you're going to suffer for a year or 100 years or 1 billion years. Who could do that? But forever, makes a billion years seem like a split second. Forever is a long time. And I can't imagine any loving parent remotely even conceiving of such a thing. Go ahead, Joel.
There's a word called evolve, evolution. I hate to use that dirty word, Barry, but it's a form of evolution that they evolved over thousands of years from the beginning of the teachings, and the human beings have evolved. We've got, I mean, the things that we didn't have 50 years ago or 20 years ago, all of a sudden we have. So there is a correlation, and that's what I think you were trying to discuss, about how they weren't ready to accept something more important or bigger. They had to evolve to a point where they could accept it. If we had TV 2,000 years ago and nothing else, and all of a sudden they're looking at a TV screen, they're going to think it's the devil jumping around on, you know, it's what is it? And that did happen years back, that people wouldn't accept change or things that evolved. So I think there's something to do, there's something in that. I'll leave it at that.
That's why at L'Dor Va-Dor, we take the position that people wrote the Torah because it seems to reflect an evolution of thought. We reject the concept that God wrote this because God, by definition, doesn't evolve. God is already perfect and he can't evolve. I reject the explanation that there was ever a time when genocide made sense, or that God would recommend genocide. I think we need to really be clear about that. I don't think we should ever say that Jewish people ever were at a point where we thought or we had to accept genocide because people worship the wrong God. That would be a horrible, horrible thing to say about our ancestors, that they were so primitive and barbaric that God had to tell them that you should wipe out every single person if they don't agree with you or if they worship a different God. We should never say that about our ancestors. And also, if you look at Mishpatim, like I mentioned, it's giving a day of rest to animals. And it also says, if an animal is suffering under a burden, the animal is someone that you hate, and your inclination is to say, I'm not going to help. Mishpatim says, help the animal, relieve it of its burden, return it to its owner. So people who evolved to that state, who are that highly evolved, that they would give animals a day of rest, certainly they could accept the teaching saying, by the way, don't execute every single person if they worship a different God. I don't think we should accept that explanation. The better explanation is that people wrote this, in my opinion. Who else wants to weigh in on this?
I'd like to hear what Rabbi Kahn has to say from what you just said, possibly. No?
You know, Rabbi Silver and I, as we acknowledge all the time, are coming from very, very different, positions in terms of the Torah. There's no doubt that the position I come from is open to a lot of attacks from the perspective of laws and narratives and stories in the Torah that run very hardly, very strongly counter to our sensibilities and our ideas of morality and ethics today. And so those are hard things to answer. Those are challenging. Those are difficult. On the other hand, for me, the challenge is to be able to understand, embrace the Torah as a whole. And when I say the Torah, of course, I mean with the oral law, and to be able to realize that there are things that are very challenging and difficult to understand. And it's quite possible that some of those things only applied at different times in history, or maybe were written but never actually put into effect. And they're there not because of that they should happen, but they're there for to teach certain lessons that we need to try and glean from them. But I don't want to rehash old territory in that way.
Yeah, it's just interesting that the Torah seems to reflect the morality and the scientific views of Bronze Age people when it was written, more so than it reflects a divine being. But there are definite problems with the contrary point of view as well. because then you're attacked for not having any moral standards. It's all human contrived. I do want to, oh, Suzanne wants to say something, then I have an announcement that I want to share with everybody. Go ahead, Suzanne.
I want to quote the late, great Rabbi Sam Silver, who used to say, Jews answer to a higher authority. Hebrew National.
Yes, that is that is actually in my sermon that I just taped about 3 hours ago. We answer to a higher authority, a Hebrew national who mustered the courage to stand up to Pharaoh, who accepted the role of a savior, who relished justice, and who tried to have humanity catch up to our best inclinations.